Hey, it's Anna. Welcome back to my channel. I wanted to do something a little bit different this week. I haven't done a video like this before. I want to talk about banned books, but specifically look at one case study. I do think banned books is a complicated issue for schools specifically to handle, right? Because you have so many different opinions coming into the library. It should be a place for everybody to learn and explore different opinions. However, you have parents that may have very strict views that they want for their children, and so trying to balance all of that, especially as a public entity, I think is difficult. I don't know if there is a 100% perfect solution. For me personally, I kind of would view books in a library like the movie rating system. Is the movie rating system perfect? No. Do you need parental accompaniment for R-rated movies if you are under a certain age? Yes. So I feel like at least there is some give and take there, and also then it puts the burdens on the parents to determine what should be read or not. I definitely find myself a parent where if my kid came to me and said, hey, I want to read this book, for example, let's say my 5th grade kid, who is not real right now, but if my 5th grader brought Icebreaker to me, you know what? I'm gonna be real honest. I would want to sit down with my kid and say, why do you want to read this book? Do you know what this book is about? Have that discussion. And then, unfortunately, I don't think I would let my 5th grader read Icebreaker because of how sexually explicit it is. But if they wanted to get into some romance earlier on in 5th grade, I think there are more age-appropriate books. That's how I'm viewing it. Now, if my 16-year-old, right, so let's say the 5th grader revisits and says, hey, I've been thinking about this book for 6 years. What do you think about, me reading it at this age? I honestly have no problems there, right? I just think that there are definitely ages. That's why we have adult books and young adult books and middle grade books. I think those exist for a reason. I don't think it's going to be a hard and fast rule for every single parent. So like I said, I think it's really complicated in terms of a school trying to get everybody on the same page. The school that I specifically want to look at is one that is in the state that I live in, which is Wisconsin. This is a little bit of an older story, but I think it is appropriate to talk about in light of the election to see how the school district handled it, what I agree and what I disagree with, and going from there. So this has already been resolved to a point, but I haven't personally reacted to it, so I thought we could look at it together. I'm going to read an article from the wisconsinpublicradio.org. I will have the article linked in the description, so if you want to read the full thing, you can. It says that in November, this is November of 2023, a parent requested the school district in southeast Wisconsin reconsider 444 books across middle school and high school libraries. 444. That is a ton of books to reconsider. In February of 2024, the school decided to keep all of these titles in circulation, but some of the books are going to be restricted. And restricted means different things at the middle school level versus the high school level. So let's go over that list and also some terminology so we can understand what is restricted, what is not. So we have continued use. The book will remain at the Elkhorn Middle School Library. Discontinued use, the book will be transferred to the high school library. Restricted use, the book will be restricted to 8th grade students. Continued restricted use, the book was already on a restricted 8th grade student list. And then item not in library, the book is not part of their collection. Do I know every single one of these books? I do not. And I'm really going to focus on the ones that are highlighted on this list. So A Child Called It is now restricted use. I don't really know anything about that. So in that scenario, for me personally, if a child came to me and said, I want to read this book, I would want to do my due diligence before letting my child read that book personally. So let's Google A Child Called It. So the description for this book is, this book chronicles the unforgettable account of one of the most severe child abuse cases in California history. It is the story of Dave Peltzer, who was brutally beaten and starved by his emotionally unstable alcoholic mother, a mother who played torturous, unpredictable games that left him nearly dead. He had to learn how to play his mother's games in order to survive because she no longer considered him a son, but a slave, and no longer a boy, but an it. Dave's bed was an old army cot in the basement, and his clothes were torn and raunchy. When his mother allowed him the luxury of food, it was nothing more than spoiled scraps that even the dogs refused to eat. The outside world knew nothing of his living nightmare. He had nothing or no one to turn to, and his dreams kept him alive, dreams of someone taking care of him, loving him, and calling him their son. So looking specifically on Amazon, this book has an 850 Lexile Lexile level. And then what is a Lexile ranking? It is a number calculated upon several factors such as sentence length, word frequency that indicates how readable a particular text is by a child. So with the Lexile score, it completely takes the context of the books out of saying, how easy is this book to read? Can you read it at a first grade level, a second grade level? With an 850 Lexile level, you have a fourth grade reading level, right? So I would say in this case, I would just want to check in if my sixth grader, because this is a restricted use book, which means that nobody over eighth grade is just checking out this book at the library. I would say with The Child Called It, if my sixth grader came up to me, because eighth graders can read this book, if my sixth grader came up to me, I would most likely let them read this book personally. I think because it is a true story, that they can gain some real world experience. And I also think it's important to see how other folks are living in the world at this time, whether it's good or bad, because that book might inspire my child to go on and really fight against abuse in a household, right? I really don't know what negative effects personally I could see coming out of a child reading this book. So I'm not going to do that in-depth of a research for all 444 of these books, but that is the type of steps I would take if my child came to me and said I wanted to read a book and I hadn't heard of it. I would definitely want to do research and due diligence. Eventually, what age would that stop at, right? Probably around when they start to enter high school. I feel like then you're already getting ready to enter adulthood. You should be able to make decisions for yourself completely. But I do think that modeling that research, at reading the descriptions of books, understanding the context of books is a good skill to teach children to make sure that they are not just reading the words on the page, but understanding the words on the page. So I personally think that's pretty fair. Are there some books that, again, if a sixth grader brought to me, I would say no to? Probably, but not A Child Called It. The next restricted use is All the Bright Places. I'd let my sixth grader read that. 100%. Like, do I think it's the best book in the world? No, but do I think a sixth grader can handle it? I personally think so. All the Light We Cannot See is still restricted use. I don't really know too much about that one. An Abundance of Catherines. I would say the only talk that I would want to have with my kid before An Abundance of Catherine is around the use of an R word, and that is a very personal issue to me because my sister has numerous special needs, and so that is an issue that I have more personal experience, that I am more passionate about, so I definitely would continue to have that conversation with the child, but then let the child read the book. An Ember and Ashes, I don't know. That's one I would have to do due diligence on. Anna and the Swallow Man would have to do due diligence on. Beauty Queens, this looks like this was taken out of the cycle and put into the high school. Same thing with Before I Fall and Beloved. So that would, again, require research. Just because a book is moved to the high school, in this case for me, I don't know if I would let my sixth grader read it. I would want to do the research. Bomb, The Race to Build and Steal the World's Most Dangerous Weapon. Boy, Girl, Boy. Again, two books that I do not know about, would have to look into. Boy Meets Boy, would have to look into. This one isn't highlighted, but it's Brave New World, which is restricted use. Pretty sure I read that my freshman year of high school, right? And to see it on any type of list in general when it was required reading for me kind of boggles my mind. Burned, I don't know anything about these Ellen Hopkins books, would need to look into them. Wow, okay. This woman wanted to challenge Catching Fire. Interesting. Sorry, I'm gonna skip around the list for a second because is she trying to ban the Hunger Games? Yes. So this woman tried to ban the entire Hunger Games series. Fantastic. But no, I would probably hand that to my kids to read and be like, here's some required reading from your mother that you should read, is the Hunger Games series. Champion by Marie Lu. I just wonder if I've read that one. Champion is part of the Legends series. I've read that. I would let my child read it. City of Bones. You know, maybe before the sibling part, right, there would be some conversations personally, but I don't think the first book needs to be restricted in my personal opinion. Class Act, I don't know. Clockwork Princess, it just says item not in library. So obviously a library can't carry every single book you might want your child to read, right? There is a lot of money that goes into it. Schools don't always get the most money, obviously. So not having Clockwork Princess in their library, I wonder when Clockwork Princess came out. It came out in 2013. So I guess it's something that, you know, somebody could get secondhand to donate to a library. It looks like it's book 3 in the Infernal Devices. Interesting. So yeah, again, I don't really know about that one. Would want to look into it. Codename Verity was discontinued and relocated. Again, I would do research there. Crank. Okay, pause. They want to ban Concrete Rose, which is an Angie Thomas book. Now, I've not read Concrete Rose, but I've read The Hate You Give and On the Come Up. I like both of those books. I would let my 6th grade child probably read both of those, honestly. Concrete Rose I haven't read, but I know it's related to The Hate U Give. She's probably trying to ban The Hate U Give, isn't she? Yes, she is. Okay, great. No, that is something I definitely don't agree with. I think The Hate U Give is a look in terms of racial disparity that I think is really able for children to understand what is going on, especially if they live in a privileged area. I think that would be very similar to the Hunger Games, where like I would hand the books to my kids and say, here's some required reading from mom. My kids might not like me if they don't like reading. I don't think I would actually assign it as required reading. By the way, I wouldn't like ground them or anything, but I would encourage them to read it. Again, Crank, I don't know. Dear Martin, I don't know. Drama. Okay. Let's talk about this one for a second. Now, have I read this one? No. However, I was part of a group that did research, and my thesis is actually available on the University of Iowa website. And I did research on 5th grade girls' perception in this book club that I would facilitate. I did it for a whole semester. And one of the books that this book club had read before was Drama for 5th graders. We read it in 5th grade. So I would definitely let my child read that. The fact that it's restricted in the school for middle school does not make sense to me personally, just because again, my program was overseen by professors, so they had done a lot of due diligence with choosing books. Just because they didn't read Drama that year doesn't mean they never read it. Very interesting to see it there. Eleanor and Park is continued restricted use. That was like the first book I ever listened to on Libby as an adult. Again, I didn't personally see a problem with it. Empire of Storms by Sarah J Maas. You know what? This is the one personally that I think I would need to do research on, because from what I've heard, I haven't read any Sarah J Maas books, is that the ACOTAR series is more of the spicier romance fantasy series, and that Throne of Glass, which I think Empire of Storms is in, is books that are more adventurous, not as much on the romance. So then you're dealing with content that has like potential violence and gore there, which again, I think it really depends on the conversations that you're having with your children. I don't necessarily disagree about Empire of Storms going to the high school though. Yeah, even on Amazon, it's grade level 10 through 12. The length and complexity of the sentences might make just more sense in a high school. But again, if my 6th grader came up to me, I would do the due diligence of looking into this book. Maybe I'll have read it myself by then to then make, the determination. Family of Liars, not in library. I read Family of Liars. I've also read We Were Liars. Was she trying to be on We Were Liars? My God, okay. And that's one where I think I liked Family of Liars better than We Were Liars, personally. I know that there is some heavier content material. I think I would lean towards letting a high school age student read it personally, but again, every child grows up differently. Every child has different reading levels, comprehension levels, so it would just depend on when I actually have a kid making the decisions there. That's why I don't want to make a blanket statement about specifically Family of Liars, but I would make a blanket statement about like Hunger Games, Drama even. Sorry, that one's bugging me the most. We have Fangirl. I haven't read Fangirl, but I want to. Freak the Mighty. She was trying to ban Freak the Mighty. I remember reading Freak the Mighty in elementary school and like bawling my eyes out. No, that one would be fine. George by Alex Gino. Interesting here. So this was a book that we read in our book club, but the book is not called George anymore. It's called Melissa, because Melissa is what the student in the book wants to be called, and that is their preferred name. But the book was initially titled George, and it went through this whole rebranding. I would let my student read that in a heartbeat. I don't know if I own it, but I would like to. Girls in Translations, I don't know. Glass, man, they are just pounding on this Ellen Hopkins lady. I really have not read anything by her. Graceling, I feel like I've heard of that. I would need to look into it. Heir of Fire, we already talked about Sarah J Maas. Hush Hush, Hush Hush, that's on my shelf right here. Okay, it says continued use, which is good. I wonder why she wanted to ban it. Probably because of the, I don't know, mythical creature thing. Who knows? I'm the Messenger by Marcus Zusak, which is the author of The Book Thief. I wonder if she's trying to ban The Book Thief. Ooh, she's not trying to ban The Book Thief. Surprising, honestly. I know why the Cage Birds things. Okay, again, I feel like this is quite jarring that a parent took the time to want to ban these books for everybody, right? For every person in the middle school would not have access to these books. Pretty bold move, in my opinion, and I'm glad it was shot down. Again, Ellen Hopkins, Identical. Okay, we have Identity, a story of transitioning, item not in the library, but if it was in the library, clearly she didn't want it there. If I Stay, I've read If I Stay, I feel like it does have some more mature themes. But again, do I think it's a hard cutoff at 6th grade? Not necessarily. I think there would be conversations. And then to be honest, and I'm probably going to be this way with other books too, if I see my child reading a book that is based off of a movie, we could probably watch the movie together. That would be a fun bonding experience. Impulse, this lady has it out for Ellen Hopkins, let me tell you. In Darkness by Nick Lake. Oh, Just Listen by Sarah Dessen. Love that she's trying to be in Sarah Dessen. Jesus, okay. Killing Mr. Griffin, Lois Duncan, author of The Giver. Okay, you can't help but start to form opinions about a person that wants to ban all these books in your head as I continue to read this list. And we're not even onto the second list yet. This is just starting to get a bit out of control, in my opinion. Kingdom of Ash. Okay, we've talked about Sarah J. Maas. Life of Pi. Okay, I don't know too much about Life of Pi. I know there's a movie about it. Let's see actually what the movie is rated. The Life of Pi movie is rated PG. Now, the Life of Pi does say 14 and up when you do look it up. I wonder if that's because of the Lexile level. It says the Lexile level is 830, which again could be similar to what we looked at earlier. It says interest levels grades 7 through 12. I mean, again, would do more due diligence into the book before making it, but if they made a PG based movie off the book, I feel like it's okay to let your child read. Just my opinion. Maybe not your first grader, but we're not talking about first graders here. Lips Touched 3 Times, discontinued, relocated. Laini Taylor. I don't know about that one, would have to look. Looking for Alaska. Again, that one would need to have some conversation about the language in the book. Personally, Luckiest Girl Alive. Can kind of understand Luckiest Girl Alive from, again, at least if the movie is similar to the book. I haven't read the book yet, but I think any books that do involve any type of school shooting is sensitive material in an actual school. I think that's where the schools have a really tough time, which I think is completely fair because you never want a school shooting to happen, but it's important for children to understand, what to do in a school shooting, to have the knowledge behind it. I think it's a very fine line. So not surprised that that's restricted use. Lord of the Flies, continued use, was also required reading for me in middle school. Okay. Me and White Supremacy, item not in library. Wonder why that was trying to be banned. Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Okay, interesting. There's Mockingjay again. More Than This by Patrick Ness, continued restricted use. Again, would have to look into that. Nimona. Didn't they just make that into something like a Netflix series? Yeah, it looks like they made it into a PG film on Netflix. I think we all know how I feel about books that are made into PG movies. One of Us is Lying, Karen McManus. I don't fully know. That is based off of like high school students, right? And it is surrounding the death of one of the high schoolers. So again, some conversations might need to be needed there. Orphan Train. Okay. Pandemonium by Lauren Oliver. I wanted to read that series myself personally, so I don't know too much about it. Paper Towns. Okay. I think she has a vendetta against John Green. Do I think Paper Towns is like the perfect book for a 6th grader? No. Mainly just because I don't like the main female character, but I would just want to have conversations before letting my child read the book. And I would let my child read books that I don't like, but I would tell my child, hey, I didn't like this book. You can read it if you want. I think that's usually how I am on my book social media anyway. I would do the same if I had a kid. Oh, she tried to ban Pet by Koike Amazy. Nice. I listened to Pet. I really like the audiobook for Pet. Glad it's on the continued use list. Pretty Little Liars. I feel like this is in a similar vein to One of Us is Lying in terms of it is set around high schoolers. You do have the death of a student involved. Okay, like, again, can the schools have a perfect option? No. But, I don't know, that would be interesting to kind of see, like, some of the more in-depth reasoning behind this to see, like, where the other person was coming from, because these are just my personal opinions. Prodigy by Marie Lu. Glad to see its continued use. Queen of Shadows. We've already talked about that. Ready Player One, I feel like I've seen before. Continued use. Rebellion. Shocking. Don't want our children reading about Rebellion. Continued restricted use. Redwood and Ponytail. Restricted use. Rethinking Normal, a memoir in transition. Continued restricted use. Rose Under Fire. Shatter Me. Restricted use. I feel like because of how prevalent I think Shatter Me is on book social media even today, that would obviously still require a conversation. Maybe I'll have read it by the time I had a kid. Shiver. Why does this? I can't tell if this woman just hates creative reading or not. I really don't know. Like, I would love to see her recommended book list, right? That's what I would love to see, because I just picked up Shiver in a little free library and I want to read it. But like, why would you not want? I don't know. Oh, I'm about to get mad in about 2.5 seconds as I continue. So I just looked down this list. So Silhouette of a Sparrow, continued restricted use. Smoke. This poor Ellen Hopkins lady. Sold, continued restricted use. Speak. I think Speak is one of the most important books that you could ever read in your life, especially as a young woman. I think it is extremely important. And the fact that this woman was trying to ban it, I think that's honestly disgusting. Specifically for Speak, I feel like I have a very personal connection to Speak, and to not give children the opportunity to read that, I think would be not good. Now, obviously, I think you should have a conversation with your child before they read Speak. I do not think it should be something that they just go into without having any context, but I still think this would be something that I would be like, let's read it. Come on, child. We have The Fifth Wave. Okay. The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. I wonder why she was trying to ban that. The Assassin's Blade. Again, we've had that discussion. The Chocolate War. I would do my research. The Color Purple. Okay, that's interesting because I know that's a movie too. Okay, you know what? It's PG-13. It's PG-13. Again, are movie ratings perfect? No. So I can see why it was discontinued and relocated to the high school. The movie's PG-13. Okay, right? Is that the perfect solution? No. If my 6th grader came up to me and said I wanted to read this book, would I do due diligence before that? Yes. And I probably haven't said it already, and someone's probably already commented. Just because my child is asking me does not mean I know that they're not going to read books behind my back. If a child is really passionate about something, they will find a way to do it. I acknowledge that. Am I going to encourage critical thinking before my child makes a decision? Absolutely. And that's what I would want to do with these conversations. So again, not perfect, but I think when you go forth to have a kid, you should try to put every single bit of your best intention forward. And that's personally what I'm trying to do. I would love my child to be a critical thinker, to challenge me on ideas, to have discussions about it. And I hope that's what I'm fostering by even reviewing a banned list for them in middle school and wanting to hear their opinions. Oh, now we're getting into more of the thes. The Fault in Our Stars. Gosh, this woman and John Green do not like each other. Movie is also PG-13. It is restricted use. Makes sense because of 13. They could have done restricted use then with The Color Purple too. I can assume the reason why it was relocated, because that should be kind of the same energy, right? If a book similar to a PG-13 level, restricted use for 8th graders, okay, it shouldn't be like a back and forth. There should be consistency, in my opinion. The Future of Us by Jay Asher, continued restricted use. The Grapes of Wrath, relocated. Okay. The Host by Stephenie Meyer. Where's Twilight? I haven't seen Twilight on here. Guess she's a Twilight fan. So, oh, The House on Mango Street. I read that in high school. Love to see that we're trying to ban that. Jeez. The Impossible Knife of Memory, restricted use. The Infinite Sea, continued restricted use. The Killer Angels, discontinued, relocated. Oh, The Lovely Bones. I think I read that in high school too. Okay. The Martian, restricted use. Perks of Being a Wallflower. That is also a movie. I don't know if comparing books to the movies is the best. This is PG-13. So is the restricted use? No, for 8th grade, right? If you're following that movie rule, but then carry the same energy for The Color Purple. Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Really? It was also PG. I think I cried to that movie. Wow. And it's restricted use? Okay. That's interesting. Oh, but The Summer I Turned Pretty is fine. All right. That's all I have to say about that. The Unlikely Hero of Room 13B, continued restricted use. 13 Reasons Why, continued restricted use. 13 Reasons Why, especially with the Netflix series, I think there needs to be conversation with the child before they read that book. In a perfect world, right? I don't think that necessarily stops them, but I do think it's important to have the conversation about depression and suicide with the child before they want to read this book. This is where it ends. Restricted use, haven't heard of it. This One Summer, continued restricted use. Throne of Glass, discontinued, relocated. To All the Boys I've Loved Before, restricted use. Okay. It's PG-13, To All the Boys I've Loved Before. So continued restricted use. Again, bring that same energy for The Color Purple. Tower of Dawn, fine. Relocating to the high school. Twisted. I think I have that on my bookshelf. I have a different book called Twisted on my bookshelf. And see, this is the thing too, because I think a child could approach you and say, I want to read this book and it's one title, and you think it's something else, and then you might just say no. I think it's important to do the research. Unravel Me, pretty sure that's part of the Shatter Me series. We have some Neil Shusterman books. We have Unholy and Unwind. Interesting. So Unsold is continued use, but then Unholy and Unwind are restricted use. So Unholy is the second book in a series. Very interesting in my opinion to see, unless I guess this is a series that like grows up with you to a point. I'm curious what the Lexile level is. It's at an 860. It says grade levels between 7 and 9, reading age 12 and up. I don't know why they decided to decide restricted use for later in the series. Do I think some series grow with you? Yes, I just did a whole video on the Pendragon series growing with with you over time. I would hope, though, that as you continue to read the series, understanding the world, that you would be able to read and follow along. Maybe not. I would definitely need to do, I guess, some research into there. Vampire Academy, I haven't read it. Vanity Fair, restricted use. Wayward Son, restricted use. We Are the Ants, continued restricted use. We Were Liars. We talked about that one. Where'd You Go, Bernadette? Continued restricted use. That book was interesting, reading Where'd You Go, Bernadette. I read it earlier this year. It is a movie too. It's PG-13. I can kind of get that one, wanting to have conversations, especially... Oh my gosh. Especially when Bernadette, like, I'm trying to think of how to explain it without spoiling it. Especially just seeing what leads up to Bernadette's disappearance. I could see why conversations would need to be had before that one. But I do remember that book. And then You Don't Know Everything, Jilly P. See, I think it's very interesting because Alex Gino typically writes books, I feel like, for a younger audience versus Where'd You Go, Bernadette? It's so interesting to see those two on a list. So that's the middle school list. Great. High school list. I don't see necessarily a key for the restricted continued use. I'm assuming with restricted use, there is some type of age that is put on it, maybe for sophomores and above. So it's going to be really interesting to see what she wanted to have, not there. So it seems like all the books that are going to be in the high school list are in the library, unless maybe it says like not in library, like some of the middle school books did. But let's go through it and see. We have A Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. I haven't read the Game of Thrones series. I've seen some of the TV show. Again, I can kind of maybe guess how you don't want I feel like with the Clash of Kings, I would need to do research before deciding, right, if I wanted my 14-year-old to read this. That's how I'm going to view most of these. Because again, I feel like once my student turns 16, it's, you want to be treated like an adult. Let's start preparing you for the world. You're going to get to make choices on what you get to read. Just like for me, I haven't had to necessarily worry about a book ban in my adult life because the only thing that's really stopping me is the finances if I wanted to buy a book and didn't want to spend the money on it. I do think that could be a conversation. Now, do I have any personal appeal to George R.R. Martin's books? No, I think they look really long. I want to stay in my little world. We have the entire ACOTAR series is restricted use. I will never forget, I have a bowler because I coach bowling, and they were reading the second book in the ACOTAR series. And knowing this student, I was like, does your mother, know what you're reading? They come from a little more, I would say, of a conservative family. And she said, yeah, my mother said she would rather me read what happens in this book than watch it. And I was like, okay, that's kind of stuck with me. So I do think ACOTAR being a series that is determined, with some restricted use, I don't think it's terrible. I do think a conversation similar to what my student had with their parents should be had before reading it. Also note that A Child Called It tried to get banned on a high school level. A 4th grade level reading book tried to get banned at the high school level. Okay, looking at some other books with continued use. A Quick and Easy Guide to They Them Pronouns. Again, what assumptions can you make on people when you see books like that trying to get banned? We have Abe Lincoln, Vampire Hunter. I feel like there's a movie about that. Is there not? There is a movie. It's rated R. Oh, so we have a movie that's based on a book that's rated R that is okay for, you know what I mean? Like, that's one where I would personally want to do a little more research into. Would I probably be fine with my student reading it? Yeah, I'm guessing it's probably the gore factor that makes it rated R. Actually, can't I look up why a movie is rated R? Oh, for its violence and brief sexuality. Yeah, so that would just need to be a discussion, potentially, again, with said freshman. Now, when I initially saw After on this list, I thought that was by Anna Todd, and I was like, oh, fan fiction? I'll just read it on their computer. All Boys Aren't Blue, restricted use. Interesting. So the Alexile level for this is an 890, which is intended for 9 to 12. It is considered adult nonfiction, and this is a memoir about the author's experience as a queer Black boy growing up and coming into young adulthood, covering violence, sexual assault, and death. So some recommended that young readers be mature before reading this, which I feel like that makes sense, right? You don't want a book to traumatize a child, right? That's never the goal. However, seeing that we're fine with Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter as continued use, I don't know if it's because I guess of the nonfiction aspect, but it doesn't make sense to me. I feel like you have to carry the same energy for gore and violence between fiction and nonfiction books if you're going to do that in a school. That's just my personal opinion. All the Bright Places, yep, we've seen that before. There are a lot of books that just say continued use. So An Ember in the Ashes, that was one for the middle school list that came over to the high schools. Oh, Being Jazz, My Life as a Transgender Teen. Again, assumptions being made by what somebody doesn't want all children to read. This is not just someone's personal opinion. This is what this person tried to get banned in a school district. You have Beloved by Toni Morrison, haven't heard of that one, and Blankets by Craig Thomas, have not heard of that one, but those are both restricted use that would require more research. The Boy Meets Boy book we see is continued use, and Boy Girl Boy, those were both books I think that were relocated in the middle school list. I'm glad to see Brave New World is continued use, just gotta say, at least in the high school. And then Boy Toys restricted use, would have to look into that. Oh, looks like we're fine with Ellen Hopkins for continued use at the high school level. Catching Fire is fine. Choke, we would have to do research in. It is restricted use. All right, I gotta look out this Ellen Hopkins lady. She's on here too much. Clearly, I have not read any of her books, but even the fact that one is restricted use at the high school level, I think is interesting. Oh, okay, so Crank, that's the one novel I decided to look up, is based loosely on real life addictions to the author's daughter to crystal meth. Okay, you know what? Yes, maybe a conversation would be needed before we read a book regarding crystal meth, especially with how on the rise, at least I feel like I've heard about fentanyl lately, wanting to make sure that a child is informed. Do I think that should fully stop a reader? No. Do I think there needs to be a discussion? Probably. Is there always going to be a discussion too? Probably not. But in an ideal world. Dime. I feel like I have the book Dime somewhere. Would want to look into why it is restricted use then. Empire of Storms is still restricted use. Oh, she tried to ban Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I read that in high school. Okay. Fight Club. Well, clearly she just knows the rule about Fight Club. You don't talk about it. So clearly it shouldn't be in the library. No. Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. So I read this in college, as a freshman in college. I read this book, and I do think it can be pretty impactful for younger readers too. There might need to be a discussion if I'm remembering how the book went correctly. Again, I read that in like 2014, so I would want to revisit that, but just like my initial gut feeling, I don't have any qualms against a high schooler reading Fun Home, especially if you want to go see the musical. We have Gone Girl trying to get banned, but it's continued use. Glass, maybe we're off the crystal meth at that point of the series. I don't know. Graceling looks like it's fine. Definitely interested. So this Chuck now has a lot of restricted use books, so that would also require some discussion. Heir of Fire by Sarah J. Maas is actually continued use, so I wonder if some of the books later in the series just get more and more gory in that Throne of Glass, and that's why some are continued use instead of restricted. We have Hooked. Now, if it was Hooked by Emily McIntyre, probably needs a discussion. I feel like if you've read it, you know. There's a lot of continued use books, which makes sense. We have If I Stay is continued use. Impulse by Ellen Hopkins is continued use. Infatus, restricted use, and Invisible Monster remix. This Chuck guy, he's getting a lot of restricted use. Later Greater is restricted use, and it's with 8s. I just need to know if that's the book. Oh my gosh. Okay, that is the book that I thought it was. Later Greater. Wow. I'm sorry. I feel like I read these in middle school. Now, should I have been reading these in middle school? It does say that the reading age is 7 years old. Oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Okay, I don't know how I feel about this. Like, I guess I wasn't expecting to see this as restricted use, especially when Amazon says it's a grade level 2 through 8. I remember reading these. I remember it being the I Am Conversations really cool format there, because I don't remember fully the content. It does say senior year, but if this is being classified for 7 to 13, I don't know. I'd probably just read that one and make the determination there. That's really odd to see on a high school level. That's restricted. Oh, it kind of makes me want to reread the series now. Last Night at the Telegraph Club. Big surprise that was trying to get banned. I'm honestly a little surprised that it's restricted use, but is it because of some type of violence? It is a queer novel, which a lot of these books on this banned list have been queer novels, which I do not think is a fair reason to ban a book. It says grade levels 9 through 12, so making sense that it's in the high school. I wonder why, if it's solely restricted just because of the queer romance, or is it because of the communism aspect? Do I think it should be restricted? Probably not. Would I still want to read it and do research? Of course I would, but I'm leaning towards this is probably, again, like a lot of the books have been been some type of bias. Little and Lion, haven't heard of it. Looking for Alaska is restricted use. No, that I don't think so. I don't think, especially having read the book, I don't think it should be restricted for high school, personally. 19 Minutes by Jodi Picoult. I know she usually writes adult books anyway, but I would have to look into that specific book. Oh, Lord of the Flies was on here twice, by the way, for continued use. Kind of funny. Pandemonium's continued use, Paper Town. So I'm trying to think of the bit, I guess with Looking for Alaska compared to Paper Towns, I would say language is a big factor in terms of the differences between there. There is, I don't know if it's necessarily considered more adult content, but I do think the language could probably be something that's discussed specifically in Looking for Alaska. That's why it's different than Paper Town. We have Point of Retreat by Colleen Hoover. Again, one of those books that I think are romances. Should you discuss those romance books with your child beforehand? Ideally, it makes sense that this is restricted use again, like some random 14-year-old picking it up that might not have any context into who Colleen Hoover is as an author and all that could make sense. I guess I'm surprised it's even in library. I'm glad to see that Push by Sapphire is continued use. That is one I remember reading Push, and that is a book that has stuck with me for a while that I wish someone would have sat down and had a conversation with me around the book Push. Honestly, I'm glad to see that this is continued, but it makes me question literally their entire list. If you don't know what Push is about, I'm not even going to look this up. I'm just going to go based off of memory here, right? You have a girl who is abused by her father and mother and gets pregnant by her father, right? Like that happens in this book based on a true story. And it's all about this girl's experience to get better in terms of like her reading and her writing, finding a teacher that she feels safe with. So if that is continued use, I feel like that changes the game for pretty much the entire list to a point. I'm glad to see it on the list though. I do think it's another important book to read, very similar to Speak, in my opinion, in terms of importance for somebody to read before leaving the high school system. Wow. I'm glad it's continued use. Not surprised that this woman was trying to ban it at all. Let's go. Rumble by Ellen Hopkins is continued use. Shatter Me is continued use. Shout is restricted use. I haven't read Shout. It does say grades 9 and up. It does talk about, sexual assaults in here. Again, seeing Push be continued use makes me question the levels for, all of the books really. We have Sold by Patrick McCormick is restricted use. Speak, good, it's continued use. Special Topics in Calamity Physics is restricted use. Have not heard of that one. We have Super Mutant Magic Academy is restricted use. I'm sorry, the title's just funny to be like restricted use in a high school. The title to me sounds much younger. So that again, would want to do my due diligence there. It just sounds a little interesting. The Bluest Eyes are restricted use, but Assassin's Blade is not. Interesting. The Coldest Girl in Cold Town by Holly Black. The Duff Designated Ugly Fat Friend is restricted use. To a point with that one when it comes to body image, right? I do think that it is important to have conversations with the child about body image, making sure that you're helping your child to feel confident in their body, making sure that they're growing up healthy in their body. Curious specifically why it's restricted use. I think there's a movie about this too, which is PG-13. Don't know why we need a restricted use for a PG-13 movie book relation. Again, are those perfect? Probably not, but Fault in Our Stars is continued use. The Female of the Species, restricted use. The Friday Night Knitting Club is restricted use. I don't know what's bad about knitting. The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. This is one again, is it because of content inside of the book? Should there just be a conversation before that? Oh, The Handmaid's Tale is restricted use. Shocking. Very. To a point, right? I would say having a conversation with your child about sexual assault, I think is important before reading The Handmaid's Tale. Do I think it should be restricted use? No. Oh, The Hate U Give, continued use. Good. The Haters is restricted use. Would need to look into that. The House on Mango Street is continued use. The Hunger Games is continued use. The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, continued use. I've heard of that one. I haven't read it. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is restricted use. Interesting. Now, I did not like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And so if my child brought me that book and said, hey, can I read this? I'd be like, probably read the physical book because I thought the audiobook was boring. I'm really trying to remember if there's anything even that is that bad. I really can't think of it. I would need to revisit it personally. That's interesting that that's restricted. The Kite Runner, I read that in high school, right? I can understand, again, I'm trying to think of a random freshman just picking books off the wall without any context. I feel like you need some context with The Kite Runner. I feel like having a heads up for The Kite Runner, having somebody to discuss it with is important. I think that's why it was a school book that we read together for that support to process what happens to the main character. Do I think it needs to be fully restricted? No. Oh my God. That doesn't make any sense. Okay. So we have The Lovely Bones. Oh, this doesn't make any sense. Okay. The middle school. In the middle school, The Lovely Bones is continued use. But then on the high school level, it's restricted use. So you're telling me an 8th grader could have read The Lovely Bones in their school library and said, thank you very much, here you go. They get to high school and it's suddenly a restricted use book. What is going on? Perks of Being a Wallflower, restricted use, which I think was consistent. Yeah, so consistent with the middle school at least, that both are restricted use. Is that a typo with The Lovely Bones? I don't know. That's, oh my gosh, that doesn't make any sense to me. This is just making me more upset the more I look at this. We have The Truth About Alice is restricted use. I have not heard of it. Oh, The Summer I Turned Pretty is continued use. The Things They Carried is continued use, which makes sense. I also read that in high school. I did a lot of reading in high school, looking at this list now. Jeez, okay. Year of the Flood, restricted use. Oh, a Margaret Atwood book, restricted use. Shocking. Oh, but 13 Reasons Why is continued use. Okay, make it make sense to me. Tilt by Ellen Hopkins is restricted use. Tricks by Ellen Hopkins is restricted use. At that point, I think I would need to look into those. Water for Elephants is restricted use. I don't really know about that one, to be honest, either. I know there's a movie, actually, right? Yeah, Water for Elephants. It's a PG-13 movie. Take that as you will. Oh, but Where the Crawdads Sing is continued use. Okay. Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. I feel like I have heard people say that this book is nothing like the movies, and I do want to read the Wicked book to see what it's like. Interesting that it's just continued use. Without Merit is restricted use. Again, the Colleen Hoover book, fine. And then Years of Wonders, A Novel of the Plague is restricted use. Interesting, I guess. Wow. This was, the latter half of the high school list was very interesting to see. I don't know if they just got like tired of looking at the book and started to be inconsistent. Don't really know there. But again, they didn't remove any books. So there are, again, those parental restrictions. There is a form that apparently you can fill out in this district to say, hey, my child can read these restricted books, which I think is nice that they have that form. Makes it very easy for a parent to give permission. Clearly, you could run into it where your kid goes to the library and they're like, your parent needs to fill out this form. And then maybe the kid's not going to say anything. I can actually click on the form here. So, okay, it does ask for your email. Obviously, when filling this out, what graduating year is your student? What permission are you giving them to read which books? Typing an electronic signature. I mean, it looks like I could just fill out this form, but obviously they would cross-reference like who my child is there. I don't have a child there. So I guess that's an interesting way to do it. Again, do I think there's a perfect way for schools to regulate books to keep every parent happy? Absolutely not. Do I think offering a form where you let the parents control what the child reads is a step forward? Sure. Do I know not every high school or middle school kid is going to be happy about that? Of course not. You want children to have autonomy to read the books that they want to read. But I do think, just like with content warnings nowadays, I think a conversation needs to be had with children about certain books. Now, does that mean they can't read them? Absolutely not. I think you should be able to read whatever you want, but I think you should go in knowing what you're getting yourself into. That's why there are trigger warnings in front of books these days. This is very interesting to me. I'm glad none of the books were removed. Probably would have been really angry if some were. I'm also glad that I'm fostering my own library as I look around at the books behind you, think about the books behind me, where I'm fostering a library where if I do have a child that is interested in reading, I'm going to be providing them with a wide variety of books to be able to read and to foster their growth and reading, which I think is the most important at the end of the day. I think all children should be reading books that are developing their critical thinking skills. I think at the end of the day, children are going to form their own opinions and they should be able to, and as parents should be guiding them to develop their own opinions. I ideally would love the opinions to not be harmful to others, to treat, people with basic human respect, to allow other people to make their own decisions. So that's where I'm going to leave that. Do I think that books should be banned nationwide? No. If there's a day that I go to a bookstore as an adult and a book is banned by somebody, I'm going to absolutely lose it. So I hope this was enlightening. I encourage you to do this in your own own area. See what books have been attempted to be banned in your own district, and definitely keep an eye out on that for the next coming years. I feel like there are going to be more and more book bans attempting to be put in place by schools. Hopefully the school doesn't just say, yeah, let's ban these books. I know school districts have, but maybe let's, as adults, use critical thinking when it comes to why some of these books might want to be banned by other people's personal opinions, and if that would actually be helpful to children to ban a book without having proper conversations with them. So thanks for watching. I am going to be posting a Little Free Library video next week, which I'm super excited about. And yeah, keep on reading those banned books, honestly, especially if you're an adult. You know, if you're a younger child, have conversations before starting some of these books, because there could be some triggering content in there. So I hope to see you in the next one.